Early bird registration is now open for Fertility Awareness Mastery Live, and I know you'll love this program. Fertility Awareness Mastery is my 8-week group coaching program designed to help you gain confidence using fertility awareness. Whether you're actively avoiding pregnancy or looking to optimize your cycles for conception, we have a spot for you. We start the first week of May. Will you be joining us? Head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAM, as in Fertility Awareness Mastery, FAM, to register today. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAM. This episode is brought to you by the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Workbook, the first beautifully designed, fully customizable paper charting workbook designed with you in mind. With 3 years worth of charting pages, the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Workbook has you covered. If you've been looking for a solid alternative to charting apps, you'll love this charting workbook. The Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Workbook is available in both Fahrenheit and Celsius editions, and it's available in spiral-bound, paperback, and ebook versions. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/workbook to order your copy today. That's fertilityfriday.com/workbook. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 306. Welcome to the Fertility Friday podcast, your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I'm your host, Leah Hendrickson-Jack. I'm the author of The Fifth Vital Sign and the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Journal. I'm a certified fertility awareness educator and holistic reproductive health practitioner with nearly 20 years of experience teaching women to connect to their fifth vital sign through menstrual cycle charting, balancing hormonal health, and optimizing the menstrual cycle without hormones. I'm outspoken about hormonal birth control and its impact on fertility and overall health because you have the right to know how your body works and how artificial hormones disrupt that natural process. I host live coaching programs to help you achieve optimal fertility and health because it's important to have healthy menstrual cycles regardless of whether or not you want to have babies. I'm also a wife and mother of 2 beautiful boys. I know, I'm a busy girl, but I managed to fit it all in. This podcast is designed to empower you to take full control of your cycles, your fertility, and your overall health. And I'm so excited that you're here with us today. Today, I'm sharing a new episode in my Fertility Awareness Reality series. And to be honest with you, I certainly, have been doing some soul searching and a lot of thinking over the past couple of weeks. So if you're listening to this episode in real time, we're amidst the government's response to the coronavirus, and that has left the majority of us in our houses with no real date as to when life will return back to normal, if it does. And so with that in mind, I certainly asked myself, should I be changing my focus and really kind of moving towards the current state of affairs, or should I continue to release and share information as I have been? Recently, I finished my 10-week program with my latest group of ladies in my Fertility Awareness Mastery program. And even within that group, there were a couple of times when, this topic came up, understandably. And the general consensus was that everyone had heard so much, everyone's been slammed with so much media, focusing the entire world's attention on that one place, that it's nice to have, let's say, a coronavirus-free zone. So I think that that's all I'll really say about it directly at this point. And, we'll just continue programming as normal. And I'm excited to potentially address a few areas in more of the general sense in future episodes inspired by what's happening. But for now, I think we'll just stick to the regularly scheduled program. So without further ado, I'm going to jump in and share the conversation that I had with Teresa, one of the members of my Fertility Awareness Reality series. So without further ado, let's jump into today's episode. So I'm really excited to be here today with Teresa. She's a member of my current Fertility Awareness Group program. And as we're recording this, we just had our 7th session. So we're not quite done yet, but we've covered more than half of the program. And so I'm really excited to have you here, Teresa. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, I always say the same thing. I feel like anyone who listens to a lot of these episodes, so like, yes, Lisa, you really like doing these episodes. Yes, it gives you an opportunity to connect with your clients, but I really do love it. And it's a great way to I love to give a window into what I see all of the time because it really normalizes what women are experiencing and going through. And so I'd love for you to share your experience with menstruation when you started menstruating, when you had your first period, what that was like, if you ever used hormonal birth control, and I guess just let us know what brought you to the point where you wanted to jump into the program and start really getting serious about using fertility awareness.
Yeah, I can say that the Pill reality series helped me a lot on that journey. It related so much to so many of the women and what they were saying. So yeah, I really appreciate it. So I had my first period when I was 12, and from what I can recall, it was normal. I don't remember ever having anything notable, and it was 3 years then before I started on the pill. Started with orthotricycline, shortly switched to orthotricycline low. And I don't remember having any terribly adverse reactions at that time. I was 15, so, my body was changing anyway. I was pretty athletic. A couple years after that, I lost a lot of weight, but it was on the swim team. So I won't really relate anything major to getting on the pill at that time. Looking back, however, when I was 15, 16 is about when I started experiencing symptoms of an autoimmune disorder that I have called achalasia, which is a neurodegenerative motility disorder in the esophagus where you lose nerve functioning and lose peristalsis function. It's degenerative, so it gradually gets worse. So at that time, it just began symptoms and it wasn't unbearable, but over 15 years, it did become life-threatening, and I did have to have a surgery to correct it, which went great. Basically, you have trouble swallowing food or liquid. So if you know anyone that has trouble swallowing, check out achalasia. It's very rare. And so just everything that I've learned about the pill over the years is like, oh, I wonder if that had anything to do with it, but I don't know. So it's inconclusive, no known cause or cure. So I was on the pill then until a couple months ago. So that was 20 years on the pill. Over the course of that time, I did switch one time, and this was because the pharmacy switched the branding or whatever and switched to, it's called Norgestimate. So it's just like a generic brand of Ortho Low. And then once they switched to Yasmin, which really sent me off crazy, like that was a big difference. And so I like begged them to switch back to the generic brand and finally did. And that regulated. But over the course of those 20 years, I now realize I had the slow creep of symptoms. So I gradually experienced depression, increased anxiety, like debilitating anxiety, panic attacks, low libido, just absolutely intrusive thoughts, even suicidal thoughts at times, just dark fog. I'm now realizing nearly all the time I knew that the pill could do these things intellectually, but because it was the slow creep, I didn't really ever like put it together. A couple of years ago, I started, and my dear mother, she was like, you really shouldn't be on the pill, But I think that at that point, I didn't really know or understand the alternative, the, non-hormonal alternative. So I was just kind of like, well, yeah, but what am I going to do? So I felt kind of helpless, which also was isolating because I'm like, well, I feel super shitty, but what can I do? So it was about a year ago that I was like, okay, I have to get off these. I have to figure out a way. And so I kind of started looking into it and found your podcast and read Taking Charge of Your Fertility twice, thanks to a roommate, because I am not trying to conceive. I'm trying to avoid. So I was like, I have to, and I love how you always say you're like a data freak. I'm like, I want all data. I need to know what's going on. So I was like, I have to make sure that I understand this completely before I do it. And I had friends that use fertility awareness method, and they're like, it's not that big of a deal. It's been working for me for a decade. Yes, they ejaculate. Like I'm like, are you sure? Are you
Talk
sure?
me through it. Hold
yes,
on.
like
Does it he actually like inside of you?
yes, I
I
had
get
that
that question a lot.
conversation.
Yeah.
Yes. I had that conversation many times. I'm like, so the mental block is real. I've told you that in our sessions. I'm like, I'm experiencing that now where I'm like, I have to really talk myself through, like, yes, this is okay. I haven't done the unprotected sex yet because I'm just in cycle 3 and it's been, wonky coming off transitioning. Yeah, so I had friends that were supportive. My partner's very supportive, whatever I need to be healthy. And so over the course of last year, I was learning, studying. I had an overseas trip in November, December. And so I knew I wouldn't be able to regulate or have any control over my diet or sleep. So I waited until after that so that I could be home to do my own shopping and sleep in my own room. So yeah, I quit at the beginning of 2020 and the change was instantaneous. I mean, like the next day I woke up, I was like, oh, well, I don't feel quite so distant. And I can think clearly. And so it was really profound. And that was just a couple months ago. And it's even now almost hard for me to kind of remember what it was like before because it's been so drastic. I will say that over the course of last year, and especially like the month prior to quitting, I was like, okay, no alcohol. I'm doing my diet like really wisely, incorporating, ancestral diet ingredients. And so I paid a lot of attention to prep myself. And I think that probably helped a lot with just like the initial coming off and detox symptoms. But yeah, I feel excellent and it's very exciting. And yeah, like I'm still just like, I've been like keeping a journal and I looked through an old journal from like 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And I'm like, oh my God, every day I was saying I felt distant and listless and, like foggy headed and distracted and sad and just uncontrollable crying, not knowing why I was crying, just freaking out, like unreasonably freaking out. I remember having a sensation of like being inside my head, watching myself behave in this way and being like, that's not me. That's not reasonable. You don't have to be like that. And like kind of almost having this conversation in my head of like talking to myself like, yeah, well, I don't know why I'm doing that. And it's like, well, you don't have to do that. Like this almost back and forth. So I felt crazy for so long, just easily frustrated, fighting, feeling indifferent. And now, like in my journal for the past couple months, I've been writing like my mood's great. I feel clear-headed. I feel very optimistic today. I'm really productive, getting things done and feeling calm, feeling relaxed, all these notes that I never took before. So that's very exciting.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you for sharing not only your story, but also going a little bit deeper into your moods. We talked about this a little bit in one of our early group sessions, I believe, because before you mentioned the journal, I was thinking, was it Teresa that had mentioned that she had journaled? Because we have a tendency to forget. I mean, what did you do on February 2nd, 2018? unless that's your birthday and or something like that. Or unless you actually have a journal and you're actually noting a few things here and there, we just don't remember those types of things. And so having a record, regardless of where you're at, for any of the listeners who are kind of at whatever stage, having some sort of a record of how you were feeling, how you were thinking over a period of time, that gives you a more tangible way to actually compare. And so, yeah, I can just imagine how many women are listening right now thinking like, wow, I thought that was just me. And
I did think it was. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not to say that everyone comes off the pill and it's magical and they're in the Garden of Eden or whatever. But when you were describing your experience, there were a few things that stood out to me. One was how you described getting your libido back. And then the other was obviously how you described just the shift in how you were feeling emotionally. So I don't know if you wanted to just talk a little bit about your libido that returned.
Sure. Yeah. I didn't even realize that I had low libido because of like a really happy, healthy relationship. And after quitting the pill, I was like, oh, what? So I didn't realize it was that way until after. And it's great. And yeah, I think it goes along with all of those like slow creeping symptoms. Like I forget who said the slow creep phrase, but I was like, oh my God, that's me. Because, you're taking the pill for 10 years and then you're like, I'm depressed. And you're like, well, I've already been taking the pill. So it can't possibly be that. It must be something new. And then you're like, well, I can't figure it out. So and I think the libido is probably a thing. Also, being on it for 20 years, I mean, your libido changes anyway. So I'm just like, it's almost like no frame of reference because it's so long, So I just had no idea, but then it came off and I was like, well, I feel excellent.
Well, one last question before we switch into the session part of our session.
Sure.
So you may not have a specific answer to this question, but if someone had asked you 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, do you have any symptoms on the pill? How's it working for you? How do you think you would have responded?
That recently I would have said yes. I think I was aware of these symptoms. Generally, like I think listening to your podcast and listening to other stories of other women helped me realize that like the intrusive thoughts, kind of the more nuanced symptoms like feeling overwhelmed and indifferent and like actual uncontrollable crying is like a symptom. It's not like I'm uncontrollably crying because I'm depressed. It's like, no, that in itself is a symptom. Because I would just burst out of nowhere and be like, I don't know why I can't stop crying. And it was like, like gut wrenching crying with like no reason. So I think at that point, I would have said, yes, I do have symptoms. I know that's impacting me negatively, but I didn't quite know, wasn't able to articulate at that time why or how exactly. And I certainly didn't know what I could do about it. I thought, well, I don't want to get pregnant. So this is just how I am, which is sad. I think I feel going through the program with you and the other ladies is helping me. But initially I was just like so sad for myself and for other women that are going through this, that you don't have to live like that. And I just wasn't educated. I just didn't know about this method. So many people don't know that there's another way. So kind of experiencing like a mourning for all that time, quote unquote, lost. I'm happy where I am now, so it's okay. And we all have our journey, so it's fine. But it does feel like a sadness that I'm going through, just being like, God, I wish I would have listened to my mom or, like done the research sooner. So really appreciate your podcast and interviewing, real people and getting their experience, because I think that helps a lot.
Yeah. I mean, as you can imagine, a lot of women reach out to me in their early 40s, and
Ugh,
it's like, wow, I just discovered this. I had no idea. I can't believe I'm 40 and now I'm learning about ovulation and how it works and all of these myths around the menstrual cycle. And on the flip side, other women who do discover it and who really want, in like the most loving way possible, to ram it down all of their friends' throats, like, you need to do this, you need to, you know. And so
totally.
everybody needs to start doing this now, everybody needs to go off the pill now. And so no, they don't. Take a breath. It's really hard, but everyone is on their own journey. And
Hmm.
sometimes just by being that supportive person or by sharing information, sharing a podcast episode or whatever, you're planting those seeds. Everyone has to kind of chew on it, chew on this knowledge, and then take that action when they're ready. So
Totally.
there's just, but there, it is okay to take some time to acknowledge what you said, mourning that time, because I mean, I don't think that it, I don't know. There's no, you can spend the time kind of being really upset about it and regretting, and but you didn't know what you didn't know, so you
Of
can't go back and
course.
change anything. And it might be that annoying optimism kind of aspect of things, but really, it's kind of like, okay, I'm thankful that I learned this now, and I'm thankful that I can make different choices because I have more information. And before, I have to really be loving to myself because I was making the decision that was best for me at that time. I was still
Right.
a capable adult, and I still was weighing the pros and cons of everything, and I still was making the best decision based on the information that I have. So we have to be very kind to ourselves because you can't act on
Absolutely.
information you don't have. It's
I
very
will say
simple.
that like one thing that's cool after quitting is that I have found that I'm able to like identify and articulate emotions. Whereas before I was so foggy headed that I'd be like, I'm like, I'd be able to be like, I feel pissed, like that pissed me off, or that frustrated me, or that made me sad. I'd be like, well, why, or like, what exactly am I feeling? Or, it was just kind of like this disconnect between my emotions. And now I'm able to, I've actually like, it's just been profound that I've been able to be like, that upset me because I need this or I feel this. And I'm able to just, whether I'm saying out loud or not, I'm able to think through my emotions and kind of like understand what I'm feeling. Whereas before I was so disconnected, I was just like, I feel upset. And that immediately frustrates me because I can't even tell why. And I just feel so disconnected and lost.
Yeah, that's really profound. I mean, and
It's been empowering on many levels.
yeah, well, and I just love in your case that you have. I know for me personally, the part of the reason why I'm going back to the journal aspect of it is because there were times in my life where I would have issues, challenges with individuals or, previous relationships or things like that. And I realized that I would be forgetting some important information. Bad things would happen and I'd be super upset about them, but then I would just forget about them. And so I started writing them down. And then I was able to really organize kind of in a more rational way, if that makes sense, because you had the information there. And so yeah, thank you so much for taking us through that. That was really just, that was really important to that conversation that we just had. So we'll casually shift into our session part of the session. And so I've got your charts up here. These ones are showing up a little small, so I might have to flip to the app charts. But either way, let me know what is at the top of your mind and what you were hoping to focus on in our session today.
Yes, I think some stuff that I wrote down, I kind of have questions all over the place, but charting the spotting, like okay, I can also try to resend you those. Charting the spotting in cycle 2. I had mid cycle spotting, and then also charting spotting because I use a menstrual cup. So it was like, like zero point 0.5 milliliters. And I'm like, would this have been spotting had I been just wearing underwear or something, So I'm like, I'm not quite sure the differentiation between a very, very light period day on the tail end or in the beginning and spotting, or how to chart that kind of observation.
Okay, well, I would say, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, when it's at the tail end of your period, it's not going to make or break your chart if it's a little bit of spotting or if it's a very light day. When you're using a cup, I would say, well, think for a moment about the difference between what you see in your cup and what you actually do see when your period is almost done. And I think you would just have to make a call as to how much is really there. So if there's actually some collected in the bottom, a little bit of blood collected in the bottom, then you could mark that as very light. But if it's like a streak or very little, then you could mark that as spotting. And you could also make a note in the comment just to clarify how much you were seeing. Does that help?
Okay. Yeah. That is what I did, is that I marked like the amount of it, and then in my book I put could be marked spotting ?
Yes.
So, and then marking those days as fertile, right? The spotting days, or is it only if it's spotting plus mucus?
So the tail end bleeding during your period, as you know, you would only mark those days fertile if you actually saw mucus when you were wiping.
Okay.
But for the mid-cycle spotting, that is not your period. We always consider those days fertile plus a count of 3. Okay. Always.
Is that because spotting could be indicative of ovulation, or is it just because? Okay. Cool.
So there are times when, due to the rapid increase in estrogen, it can stimulate a little bit of bleeding that can happen around ovulation. And so when you have that little bit of spotting mid-cycle, it's not your period, we have to assume that it's potentially fertile. And then we would consider the 3 days after potentially fertile. And that allows us to really get clear on, did I ovulate? Did I not? Am I going into my fertile phase? So that's why it's a precautionary measure to ensure that the method is effective in cases like that.
Got it.
Which I know you appreciate because you're a 0 on the scale.
0.
I know you appreciate the precautionary measure.
Yes, I do. Yeah, that was another thing, is like, even though I know I'm a 0, I'm 36. I just turned 36. So I'm like, well, if that changes, now's the time to figure it out and prepare myself, because I'm like, the window's closing, as they say. So,
well, when we talked about in one of our set or multiple sessions about managing the fertile window, and we talked about the scale. So 0, no babies. And then of course 10, I'm actively trying and I wanted babies yesterday. And so what's interesting just in general from my observations working with women all these years is that it is possible to move from a 0 to like a 7 or an 8 within a couple of cycles. And it's just a thing. Now, obviously, some women are listening and they're a 0 and they're like, yeah, absolutely not. But this is just an observation that I'm sharing with you. And you can appreciate that because you're at a stage where it's on your mind. And so 6 months from now, we could be having a very different conversation. And it just is what it is. This is why this work is not just black and white. This is why it's really important to educate yourself about the rules, understand exactly how the method works so that you can create those conscious decisions around everything that you're doing. But also you have to, one of the things that I suggested when we were talking about managing the fertile window and getting clear on where you're at is when you decide, okay, so let's say I ask you, where are you on the scale? And you tell me that you're a 0. Well, we're recording this in March. And so it's a good idea to check in with yourself every month. And that might sound silly, but it is what it is. Because sometimes you realize that, wow, I used to be like an absolute 0, and now I'm a 2. And it's just good to always be in conversation with yourself because you can't, from my experience, it's like, even if you're a 0, it doesn't mean you're going to be a 0 in a year.
Well, it's also a journaling aspect where you're like, Well, I don't remember for that kind of thing, you might remember, but it's like, I can see how it's valuable to keep that conversation open with yourself.
Yeah. Well, and it's also possible on the flip side to actually be at a 9 or a 10 and then to not be, for something to happen. And then for a period of time to be at a 0 or a 2, or so it goes both ways. And that's why I do encourage everyone who's using this method for birth control in particular to not just make those decisions and think that they're going to stay forever the same. Yeah.
Daily observations.
That's right. Monthly check-ins regarding your status, just to be, and also check-ins with your partner. Are you on the same page? Are you at the same number? Okay, so tell me a little bit about the charting aspect. So I know that you had a shorter cycle and an early ovulation recently.
Yeah.
But tell me just a little bit about the charting aspect, how it's been going. I know you had a question about sensation.
Yes, telling the difference between smooth and lubricative, I think, has been hard for me to tell. I've marked lubricative, but like that first cycle after I quit, I was so ecstatic, just like feeling so good, and like my diet was absolutely impeccable. I was sleeping, just like doing everything really carefully. And so I marked those lubricative days, and it all matched up, with mucus. So I'm not second guessing the observation itself, but those days I'm like, oh, that might have been, because I was kind of responding to the sensation I felt internally, just like walking around so the word sensation, I was like kind of taking it more generally rather than like the sensation on the paper, right? Yeah. When you're doing the wipe. So now I understand that the sensation that we observe is from the wipe on the paper, and that anything else is secondary to note. So I think telling between smooth and lubricative on the paper sensation, and then also how to observe or how to mark when I feel the sensation internally.
Well, so with this method, there's all the different methods, but with the method that we're learning together, that I'm teaching, the sensation is quite literally like, how does it feel when you wipe your vulva with toilet paper? And so have you experienced a sensation where you wipe, so you go to the bathroom and you're either wiping like before or after, and it actually feels really slippery? Have you experienced that where it actually glides?
Yes.
Okay. And then have you also experienced where it's not dry, but it doesn't glide?
Yes.
Okay. So that's good, because it's always harder when you haven't experienced both sensations.
Right.
So the challenge is to just make a decision at the very when you do the wiping and not second guess yourself. Just make the decision and just stand by it. Just stand by your decision.
Yes.
Be firm.
I think I mentioned to you in our previous session that and I think I said it once here already, that the mental block is so real. Yeah. So yes, that is something that I do need to continue to coach myself on, of just call it like you see it, or call it like you feel it, rather.
Nothing bad is going to happen if you make a mistake, first of all. So, you know what I mean? Nothing bad is going to happen. I'm not going to come out of your wall and lecture you. It'll be okay. So when you're wiping, I would say the best suggestion that I can give you is close your eyes. If you find that helpful, that often is helpful. Wipe first, and don't look at the toilet paper. Make the decision of what it feels like. Is it dry? Is it smooth? Is it lubricative? And then stick to it and live your best life afterwards. Okay. I've been saying that to my kids a lot. Let's move on. Let's live our best lives. I wanted to jump into today's episode to ask you a question. Have you registered for Fertility Awareness Mastery Live? This is my 8-week group coaching program, and it's designed to help you unlock the secrets of your menstrual cycle. Fertility Awareness Mastery teaches you everything you need to know about using fertility awareness cycle tracking to achieve your intentions. Whether you're trying to get pregnant right now, whether you're trying to avoid pregnancy at the moment, or whether you're planning to conceive in the future and are kind of juggling the birth control side and also the preconception side, we have you covered in this program. Get to the root of your period problems, hormone imbalances, fertility challenges, and so much more. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAM, FAM, to reserve your spot today. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAM. Now let's jump back into today's episode. Okay, I understand he's totally your pencil. Let's move on. Let's live our lives. But so that would be my suggestion. And then don't go back and tinker, because sometimes you'll feel a sensation and maybe what you see doesn't match what you think you should see. But we've talked a little bit about that. So, and just kind of trust that. And then if there's anything else that you observe, anything you want to add, then certainly add that in the comments. And that'll help it'll help a little bit with staying consistent with how you're doing it and how you're making those decisions. Mm-hmm. And it'll also help to just build your confidence. So smooth and lubricative are similar, but they're not the same. So lubricative is super slippery, glides. There's no friction really, whereas smooth, there is some friction. And you've experienced both. So.
Okay. Yeah, I think after our last session, I think it's cool. Like I noticed that I had a lot of breast tenderness around ovulation. And you were saying that breast tenderness can be indicative of different areas of the cycle for different people, depending on different things. So I can appreciate how noting like, oh, I felt like a wet sensation just like walking around today, like internal, just like, because there were several times in that first cycle where I like ran to the bathroom. I was like, I started my period, or like, I was like thinking that it was going to be like wet and it was nothing, but it was just all internal. So I can appreciate how noting those secondary things like breast tenderness or whatever can help you interpret on a larger scale. Like, oh, I feel that when I'm ovulating, or usually, I guess it's nothing cut and dry, but.
Well, because you're on cycle 3 post pill, right. Once you'll start to get a sense of if you may not experience it every single time, but you may experience some of these things fairly consistently or most of the time. And so once you get into cycles 6 and 7, you'll start to really get a sense of those patterns. So at this stage, making the notes and kind of starting to observe those things is really helpful, not because you can confirm ovulation with breast tenderness necessarily by itself, but because it's always there. For some women, they do have those secondary signs that then just reinforce, it builds that confidence. So you see your temp shift, you see that your mucus dried up. Oh, and my breasts feel a little bit sore, or the breast tenderness I felt at ovulation went away, or however that plays out for you. So all of the secondary signs are helpful. And so we still have a couple of sessions in the program. Mm-hmm. So I know there's more that we'll be going through in our future sessions. But for today's session, were there any other questions that you wanted to go through?
Yes. Post-sex, when I go to the bathroom, how do I check there? Because I can tell the difference between arousal fluid and mucus. Like the arousal fluid dries quickly, right? And it doesn't stretch, or maybe it stretches for a second and then it just like kind of evaporates. So I can tell that difference. But when you go to the bathroom after having sex, how do you observe that necessarily,
Right after sex?
Yeah, or shortly after, or how long after should I start marking the observations?
Well, so we're talking about sex where there hasn't been any ejaculation with a barrier. Right. So, I mean, immediately after sex, that is an opportunity to get familiar with your arousal fluid and that type of thing. And so my suggestion would just be, you can't count that as an observation right immediately after sex. So that's a good opportunity to kind of wipe all the arousal fluid off and to do a nice wash, with water. We've talked about that in our program.
Right. Yeah.
And so anyone who's been following me knows I talk frequently about not washing with oil with soap. So washing with water and just starting with a fresh, clean slate. And then I would say once you've kind of finished that, so the following observations when you're urinating throughout the day,
Okay.
or whatever have you, I would call it as I see it.
Okay.
And then if there's something that you're unsure about, then mark it in the comments. But I would just continue wiping as normal, but not like immediately after sex. It's not really an observable thing.
Okay. And yeah, we just use condoms, so I haven't used like spermicide or anything like that. So I did have some questions about like using sets, or like just how long does spermicide stay there? Like will I accidentally observe that, or
It's hard to say because
Yeah.
it would depend on the thickness and all of those things. So if you're using spermicide after sex, similar to what we just described, just sit on the toilet, see if anything comes out, wipe and wash or take a shower, whatever, and then just monitor throughout the day. I think that paying attention, so doing your first initial kind of rinsing and then paying attention, especially the first couple times that you use the bathroom after that, you'll start to get a sense of, is this like really thick and gooey, like the spermicide, for example, or is it dry, or whatever the case is. And I think that you would just have to play with that and just see, because it's possible the first time after you go to the bathroom, you might see some, but it's one of those situations where initially you just have to call it as you see it, but then pay close attention to any differences, have a feel of the spermicide outside of the context of sex. So put some on your fingers and have a sense of it and see if you're able to discern the different feeling. But in the pre-ovulatory phase, especially given that we're in cycle 3 post-pill, you'd want to be on the conservative end. So if it looks like mucus, for now, we're going to consider obviously that and take this as an opportunity to really learn how your body responds to, spermicide, or if you're using lube, you can kind of do the test of urinating, going to the bathroom and really trying to get it all out after sex, and then seeing because if it is all out, then likely you might be dry on a dry day after sex. And the other thing I'll say about that is that the post-ovulatory phase is a great playground for all of those things. So make a specific point of, in the post-ovulatory phase, when you're typically dry, so with your cycle pattern, you're typically dry. We haven't seen a lot of mucus post-ovulation in your cycle so far. It doesn't mean it couldn't happen, but we haven't seen a lot of anything really post-ovulation. So that's a good playground. Use if you're using lube, if you're using spermicide, and then, try different methods of cleaning it out after sex, and then see if it's actually dry throughout the day for the rest of the day, or if you're actually seeing some of that residue.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I think, again, going back to like the mental adjustment of like, it feels like that's a really simple question, but it's like baby steps, like, okay, yes, confirm yet again that these things happen. And yes, call it like you see it, call it like you feel it. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, and it might feel like you're asking a question that's obvious, but everything's obvious after you get a good explanation of it. And most, if not all of my clients have the same or very similar question. So you're not alone in this. It's a process there's this huge difference between reading a book about this, listening to a podcast about it, actually doing it. And so when you're in the throes of learning, there are all of these fluids and materials, and we have to sort it all out, and we really have to have those best practices. So I'm glad that I'm able to just share with you the kind of quickest and easiest way to sort all of it out.
Yeah.
So before we wrap up our call today, I just wanted to just ask you, for the listener who's fully binging on these reality series episodes because she's thinking about coming off the pill, or other type of hormone. She's thinking of switching to a non-hormonal method. What, if anything, would you want to say to her?
Well, that was me a few short months ago. I would say do it. It feels like a lot. Like I read that Taking Charge of Your Fertility twice and like took notes and underlined and highlight, and it feels like a lot. And it is a lot to learn, especially if you don't know anything about it. But once you start doing it, and I'm only 3 months in, it's not a lot. It becomes very easy, very fast. Maybe easy is not the right word, but it's doable. I feel like I understand a lot more. I would say getting support from you or a group like this, or any coach, has been extremely helpful to be able to ask these questions and get direct feedback. And I think I feel so much better than I have in so long. And not to say that I wasn't happy before. I didn't experience wonderful things. I was happy with my life, but the fog has completely lifted, and I would wish that fog on no one. So I think just do it. I think the preparation is really helpful to do it before you quit. So getting like clear on when to eat what, or what to eat, or what am I not eating, or what should I do, or what vitamins. It was really helpful making the transition smooth, and like I've been able to incorporate different things in my diet that I'm like, oh, if I'm feeling like this, maybe I should eat that, just having that understanding. And I think like what I did, where I planned to quit after my trip, like I really wanted to quit. I was like, I need to quit, but I'm like, planning it is okay. It's okay to wait until you're like, I'm ready to be present with this. And I think also listening to your body is key. Like I'm talking about this mental block, and you're telling me again, like you've told me this stuff before, but it's like, listen to my body, just listen. And even listening to my body before I quit is like, I knew it wasn't good for me. I could tell. So listening to your body is really important and valuable.
Well, you're doing amazing. You're in cycle 3. And this is something that it's a experiential learning situation. So this is something where each cycle helps to reinforce the knowledge. And with each cycle that you chart, you get more comfortable and confident. So your friends who you mentioned, one of your friends have been doing this for a decade. For her, it's easy because she's been doing it for a long time. And so it's like nothing. And so you'll get there. It just takes a bit of time and patience and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see how I could get there easily. After making the leap and using the workbook and reading the books and preparing myself, I'm like, oh yeah, I can see how that can be much easier, even easier than it is now from 2 months ago. So it's worth it. You deserve it. It feels really good.
Thank you so much for being here, Teresa. It was so nice to have this conversation with you, and I'm just really excited to share our conversation with
Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, my pleasure.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/306. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode with Teresa. There were so many parts of her story that I really resonated with. And I thought it was really fascinating that she had kept a journal for as long as she had. And so she was able to go back in kind of real time and look at her emotions and feelings and thoughts during the time where she was on contraceptives versus when she was off. And so it's really interesting. And I think for a lot of you listening, for those of you who journal and who have the ability to do a similar thing, or for those of you who've had a similar experience, I think it's really kind of interesting to look at it. And also for those of you who don't. One of the benefits of charting that I always talk about with my clients is just that benefit of having that data, having that record. And when you're paying attention to what's happening on a cycle to cycle basis, it certainly can shed a lot of light. Because what I find is that we think we're going to remember the details of what happens, but it really gets quite foggy. So, none of us are that great. Maybe some of us, but I think the vast majority of us aren't that great at remembering specific signs and symptoms that we experienced at a specific time of the cycle, 3 to 4 cycles ago. But if we write those down and pay attention and then have a bit of a reflection period of time when you're actually going over and looking at everything that happened, that really offers you a unique ability to have that window into what's happening. And in addition to that, what's really helpful is the empowerment piece that comes off of that. So when you have your appointments, when you're seeing medical professionals, when you have an intuitive sense that something's wrong, plus symptoms that are related to your cycle, for example, you have record. So, no one can tell you, well, I guess someone could tell you that it's in your head, but it's actually on this piece of paper and I've been tracking my cycles. And so even if you think it's in my head, it's not. I have the data right here. So I find that there's a huge empowerment that could come from just always staying in this conversation with your body, always paying attention to what's happening. And not that everyone needs to journal, but if you do, it can be helpful in certain situations, because one of the things I hear a lot is, okay, the pill didn't bother me. I didn't have any symptoms when I was on it. Or, I was on the pill for years and at first I didn't have any symptoms, but gradually they started creeping up. But usually these are done in reflection kind of afterwards, because you can't truly know sometimes if something is causing a symptom or if, something like that is happening in the middle of the situation. It's often in retrospect, in hindsight, once you have come off of it, stopped taking it, and your body has kind of settled down a little bit, that you can really make that reflection, make that connection. So I just want to thank you for spending some time with us here today, for tuning into the show, for spreading the word about fertility awareness, for sharing episodes with your friends, tagging me on social media. I really appreciate all of you for being part of the Fertility Friday community. And I hope to see you in the next round of Fertility Awareness Mastery. It is virtual, and we're doing our classes throughout the day, and there's still spots available. Due to the current situation, I actually ended up extending early bird pricing. So if you are planning to join us, make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAM, fertilityfriday.com/FAM. And so with that, have a wonderful weekend. I hope that you're doing all right and hanging in there. And if you're listening to this in the future, I hope that you have an awesome week or weekend ahead of you. And of course, as always, be well and happy charting.